Today, we've got a bunch of great people who are going to be joining today's COP, as well as our fantastic speaker. So we'll let everybody keep kind of trickling in. And while you do, I'm going to throw up the icebreaker for today. As a reminder for our session, in today's community of practice, we are talking about what CX metrics actually matter and how to measure them. So for this icebreaker, and you can just throw this into the chat if you feel comfortable, we are asking you, what is your number one CX metric? Now, that might be a little bit of a trick question because you came here and you're like, I want to learn what CX metrics actually matter. So how can I have a favorite CX metric? But feel free, if you feel comfortable, to throw one into the chat. I will say, for my own personal experience, I really like looking at the engagement score. So we have on all of our different webinars and things like that, we have a piece that kind of looks at how engaged folks are throughout a particular training. And that's one of my favorite metrics to kind of take a look at. Eric put in his favorite is the net promoter score. I think that's a very important one. So definitely something to be taking a look at. For those of you that are just logging in, by way of introductions, again, my name is Emily Jarvis, and I'm here to lead today's COP. And today we're really talking about what CX metrics really matter and how to measure them. Folks have said, customer effort score, not a common one. Ooh, that can be really meaningful, Sarah. I agree. Retention is a good one. We are going to get into what CX metrics are, so there's no worries if you are not fully clear cut on what a CX metric would be. So while I go over some housekeeping items here and introduce our wonderful speaker, I'm just going to remind you all that the icebreaker is to note down a CX metric that you like, or one that you're interested in learning more about. Employee satisfaction is another good one, Jeff. I really appreciate that. All right, while you are answering that icebreaker question, here are some housekeeping notes for our group. You can use the chat, which you're using right now, to answer that icebreaker question to communicate with everyone on today's training. You can also ask our expert questions in here. It's a great forum to learn tips and tricks from your fellow COP members. But if you want to and you're feeling brave, you can also use that raise your hand feature, and we can have you ask a question audibly. That is perfectly fine. You can also put a question into the Q&A portal if you would prefer that as well. All right, so we do have a wonderful speaker joining us today, and that is Tori Leonard. She's a UX practice manager, and we are really excited to have her joining us today because she knows all things CX and CX measuring. So we are really lucky to have her in our presence. Before I get over to Tori, though, we do have Michelle, who in the chat said, public library, we count people in the door, circulation, program attendance, but we don't have any customer satisfaction and feedback measures. That is totally understandable. You can see how that might be a reality on the ground, but those measurements that you are taking are great ones to begin with. So that is great to see. And I love to see a public library reference. We're going to story time this weekend with my kid, and story time is my literal favorite thing to do with him. So the libraries are amazing. So let's get started today with some questions. Now, as you can see here, I've got a list of questions to jump off today's discussion. But if you've got one, go ahead and throw it into that webinar chat or into the Q&A portal, and we will definitely get those questions answered. So, Tori, let's do a little intro first. So tell me a little bit about you and your background and your role in CX.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to meet you. Excuse me. My name is Tori Leonard. I am, as Emily mentioned, a UX practice manager. I actually work for a human-centered design consultancy that specializes in working with government organizations and nonprofits to improve the user experience, the customer experience of their products and services. So over the last like 10 to 12 years, I've been working with a variety of different clients, like whether it's working with like a public utility or a library or Department of Construction and Inspection or Employment Security Department, all sorts of different government agencies on helping them to make their products and services and programs more user-friendly, usable, accessible. And so it's definitely a topic I'm really passionate about. I will say when it comes to customer experience goals and metrics, this is a great topic that's always evolving and always changing. There's always new best practices out there. So I feel flattered to be invited to talk today, but I will be also referencing other experts that you could look into for inspiration,
Love
because I
that.
think, yeah, your customer experience metrics are really custom
Mm-hmm.
to who you are as an organization, who you're trying to serve, and what they need from you to have a good customer experience.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny that you mentioned that like targeted experience because we were talking CX measurements a couple of weeks ago at a different training that GovLoop was hosting, and we had someone from the VA on, and they were talking about improving their metrics so that when you enter a VA hospital, they're really confusing. Any hospital is confusing, right? You walk in the door, and unless you're going to the emergency department, you really have a hard time sometimes figuring out where you're supposed to go. And so they at the VA kept getting this feedback of like, your hospital is confusing and it stresses me out when I get there and I don't know where I'm going and I'm going to be late for my appointment and all those things. And so they created this red door policy where now there's somebody waiting as you enter the hospital that's just going to escort you where you need to be or give you really clear cut directions. And it wasn't something that they needed technology to do. They simply put a person there, but that person dramatically transformed the experience of all these people rushing to the hospital. So it is a very good kind of consideration that you're talking about, that different agencies, different departments, different entities, even within a department, are going to have different things that they're looking at and they're measuring in order to see that sort of improvement. So Tori, let's start with some basics because, as we said, experience is going to be radically different. So, what metrics I'm looking at here at GovLoop could be very different than what Michelle's looking at for the public library, what others are looking at based on their agency. So, that begs the question, if I'm new to customer experience and I'm looking to create some goals and priorities for myself, and my team, where should we start? What are some things we should be looking towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think like any customer focused organizations should be tying their goals and their metrics to helping their customers accomplish those goals. And sometimes we know, or we think we know what those goals are based on like the services our program offers. But I would almost always recommend taking a step back and conducting some foundational discovery research to really understand who your customers are, what they need, what challenges they're facing, and how that might impact the services that you're trying to deliver.
Mhm.
So that you can identify like meaningful opportunities to improve and empower them to better accomplish their goals. And then build metrics and goals around helping them, overcome that challenge or reach that goal that might be much more specific than a generic goal of having more people be able to access something or more people find a piece of information on the website or whatever other metrics you might be looking at. um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely where I would always start, is figuring out what you know about the people you're trying to serve and what challenges and needs they might have,
Mhm.
so that they can be really truly customer focused metrics versus like business outcome metrics, which are also important. but
Yeah.
are pretty routine and already normalized in a lot of our organizations.
Yeah. Um, it's so important to do that foundational research because we were talking to a woman a few weeks ago at a sanitation department, and she was saying, my metric for success is when I don't hear from anyone, because that means everyone's trash was picked up properly, that there were no kind of missed locations or things like that. And so sometimes you assume that getting the most feedback possible is going to be the best entity and to show really good CX measurements. But she was like, for us, no news is good news, right? Like, I don't want to hear from anybody because that means that things were going as they should be. And so, really understanding, to your point, that kind of core foundation of what your organization is looking to achieve and then mapping goals to meet that can really do a good service of better understanding where those metrics should go rather than just saying, how many people have completed this survey or how many people have come to our website for traffic or something like that. There can be kind of some different measurements that you look at based on your own organization.
That's
So,
a really
yeah.
interesting example because I would argue that that's probably not a good UX customer experience metric
Mm,
because what behavior is that
mm,
driving?
mm,
Like if you
mhm.
really don't want people to contact you, there's lots of ways you can prevent people from contacting you. You can make it really hard to find your contact information. You can,
Well,
break those things down. So while I think it's a good anecdotal like sign that things are going well,
yeah.
maybe for like a customer experience metric, you got to be careful that the what you're choosing to measure is what you're managing to and what
Mm,
your team is going to try to influence with the decisions they're making every day. So that like I think well, our metrics also don't live in isolation, right? So like if someone
right.
outside of the organization saw that their metric was low call volumes or something like
Yeah.
that, it could be misinterpreted as
Mm,
trying not to provide customer support or something. Or an example in the child support space I've seen is oftentimes inside the organization, there's a lot of focus on having open cases and that it's a good thing to have open child support cases. Um, and they have whole conference events about how to open more cases. But from the family perspective, they don't want that. They want their
right.
cases to be resolved and to achieve some sense of stability with their families. So yeah, you got to be careful where you're putting your focus in the
Hmm.
metrics that you're picking.
That's a great point. And Olivia wrote into the chat, she said, in that situation, would a better metric be something related to how many times a customer had to call for the same issue? So maybe looking at the volume in which it took to get something resolved versus, just saying that no one contacted them or something like that.
Yeah, I think that could be a good one. I think the other thing, maybe with some discovery research, is figuring out like of the people who call, what are they calling about?
Mm-hmm.
And we have a more focused metrics that is helping target solving for a problem that is causing them to call versus just trying to stop them from calling in general.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah, like if you do some research, like looking at the call logs and see a pattern where everyone's calling because nobody knows what day their trash is getting picked up, maybe you would design a metric that was about better communication of that or like
Mm-hmm.
better follow through of residents getting their garbage out on those days or something like that to see basically like what's the change you want to see
Mm-hmm.
in the world? Like what do you want to change for your customers experience and how could you measure whether or not you are either making progress towards that or define what success means, what does done look like? Could be good ones.
Yeah. I love that.
Um,
All right, so Caitlin wrote in here, I've been wondering about responsible transparency. Sometimes having access to data without context can be harmful. For example, my chart notifications of lab or test results hours or days before meeting with your doctor, similar to the open child support case. I love this question because your my chart example is perfect because I don't know if anyone else has looked at those things and seen stuff in medical um terminology and been like, oh my goodness, I need now to Google this. And you have deduced that you have some disease, but you don't have it because the doctor hasn't explained things to you. So, Tori, in this case, how do you balance that transparency piece with sort of the data that needs kind of a little bit more explanation?
Yeah, I think, in that specific case, I was actually talking to a cancer hospital like a few days ago about that specific problem that users encounter sometimes of getting their lab results before they've talked to a human being. And I think I would say that you could have a thoughtful and strategic approach to responsible transparency if you have a thoughtful and strategic approach to your customer's journey. So like what
Mm-hmm.
are their touch points with you as an organization, and where are those opportunities where we could be responsibly transparent, or where we have to be transparent but it's causing problems and we need to just design a way to solve for it. So like in that case, maybe there needs to be a better procedural trigger for a nurse to call same day as lab results are released, or something to
Mm-hmm.
alleviate that problem. But if you can map the customer's journey, all the touch points they go through when they interact with your organization to achieve a goal, you could then kind of map, both what you internally want to be tracking to see how your customer experience is doing, but also identify specific points where you could change something about like where you do shared data,
Mm-hmm.
to provide contextual information to support like in people's interpretation of that data, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that the nurse thing is a good example in that, there's a trigger that needs to happen so that you're provided more context. Maybe not all of the context because the doctor isn't available probably to speak to you as soon as the results are out, but more. And I think sometimes, um, you look at situations and they're black and white. It's either this or that, when oftentimes there's this space in between, where you could maybe go part of the way into that responsible transparency piece, and provide some more context in there. So no, I think that's really helpful. For our attendees, keep these questions and comments coming. They're really very useful. And I'm learning a lot of questions as you all are putting them in as well. I want to ask quickly, I thought I saw somebody raise their hand, but then it went away. So I just want to give that person a chance if they did have their hand raised, to ask their question. Oh, sorry, Caitlin. No worries at all. I pressed the wrong button in Zoom 35 times a day. So I'm right there with you, but I just wanted to make sure we weren't ignoring anybody. All right. So back to the questions that we've got here. So there are a lot of different metrics that you said we can measure. We should be looking sort of at our strategic plan, our mission goals overall, what it is that we're hoping to achieve for our end users or our internal users, wherever we're trying to measure these CX metrics. So with that in mind, what is the proper cadence for this? Because you can't send a survey out every week being like, are you happy? Well, I guess you could, but you probably shouldn't send a survey out every week or every day saying, how are things going? Are we improving? So, how often should we be checking in with our CX goals and kind of looking in some of these measurements?
Everybody's favorite answer of it depends. I do want to like take a step back, because I think
Yeah.
part of the answer to this is like, what are these for? How are you
Yeah.
using them? Who are you sharing them with, and why are you sharing them with someone just to report out on status so they have a general awareness of, how operations are working, or are you sharing it out with the team who's laser focused on influencing that metric and trying to make that metric improve in some way or change in some way? So I kind of go back to, like, once you understand what your customers' needs are, and you understand your organization's strategic vision and mission, and hopefully strategic goals. Ideally, there are some strategic goals that are very clearly customer focused. But even
Mhm.
if there aren't, you can still take your team's goals and try to translate, kind of flip the coin from the business perspective to the customer's perspective, some of those organizational goals, and define some customer experience goals that ladder up to those organization goals and support that organizational outcome. So for example, if you were if you were a department that handled permitting for housing, like construction and things like that, your organizational's mission and vision might include a goal around increasing the affordable housing in your community.
Mhm.
That sounds great, but how do we get there? And how do we make it a customer focused
Yeah.
metric? So maybe your team might be thinking about or doing some research to understand, well, what are the barriers to getting a permit for people? And maybe that you find out, like, there's a huge barrier for people who are not professionals to improve their home or add a unit, for multi-generational living or something.
Mhm.
So you might end up with a customer experience goal and a metric that's really focused around, like, making sure any person can successfully apply and receive a permit in under 4 months or some amount of time. And that makes it, like, specific and measurable, but it also incorporates other aspects of your mission and vision to bring in issues of equity. If
Mhm.
anybody can do it, then it should be accessible. It should be available in all languages.
Right.
There should be adequate supports in place for people who need a little bit more guidance to get through that process. So um, those goals can be turned into really, like, design challenges for your team.
Mhm.
And then you can design specific metrics that track towards it. So for that, maybe you're tracking, what is our average time from submitting a permit to receiving it? Are we decreasing it? Does it change depending on who you are, your level of experience or language or things like that? Or, it could be a customer feedback metric at the end, like instituting a feedback survey so people can tell you what's easy, what's difficult, or what help they need to better get
Mhm.
through that process. So back to cadence, I guess. I think about, like, how can you integrate this into the way your organization works so that it
Mhm.
naturally, at least the reporting cadence, is
Mhm.
tied to moments of reflection and planning. Because if you're just sharing data nonstop, it becomes white noise
Mhm.
and people won't um, use it as a source for informed action. So if you could tie the cadences to your strategic planning cycle, to quarterly business reviews, to weekly stand-up meetings, depending on the level of metric that you're working with, that's going to make it much more powerful and much more likely to be used and understood and talked about than if it's something that you're either reporting way too frequently, but with no conversation around it, or
Right.
only once a year. And it's just kind of like, that's an interesting fact.
Yeah.
You kind of want to embed it into your processes so that it becomes a useful tool instead of it just being another piece of data.
No, I think that is incredibly important, and Kellen said that's such a great point, and I agree because I think we've all sat in those meetings where you've had a PowerPoint and they put up a stat or an anecdote, and it's like, these amount of people were impacted, blah, 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 and then you move on to, like, the next part of the agenda, and it was like, "Oh, that was interesting," but you're done with it, right? So I love this idea of attaching it to moments that matter, whether that's, as you mentioned in the strategic planning part, maybe it's your budget analysis. I don't exactly know within your organization what those moments that matter really are, but figuring out ways to put that cadence into those places to have that CX really reflected in there is going to be really valuable than say pulling stats maybe every 3 weeks or 3 months or whatever it is. She Kellen, sorry, I don't know. It says, I feel like otherwise people just glaze over and wonder why am I sharing these thoughts? I'm a management analyst. So she can definitely feel your pain there. So I appreciate that.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think communication is definitely at least half the battle, right?
Definitely.
There's figuring out the strategy, starting the measurements, but communicating about it is at least 50%, because if you don't
Oh yeah.
communicate well about it with the right people, then that information is not really helping, and it's
Hmm.
becomes busy work, or you might
Hmm.
stay too focused on the wrong thing. So I also recommend building in a cadence of like, let's pause and do a retrospective. Do
Yeah.
these metrics still matter?
I love that.
Something might have changed. Maybe we've been trying this metric, but it's not telling us anything. It's been off track
Hmm.
forever and we're doing nothing about it. Maybe it's
Hmm.
not a good metric. If you're
Hmm.
not, it's not inspiring action, or problem solving, then we might need a better metric that is easier for your teams to identify how they can impact it,
Yeah.
through the way they're doing things differently on projects or in delivering services.
Yeah, we talk about that problem all the time when we're talking about just data generally. Data for data's sake, there's it's good to collect it, but if you can't do anything with it, you just have a megabytes or trigabytes or whatever huge amount of data that you have just sitting there, and you're kind of pulling it together for no reason. Sarah said, I found sometimes the hardest but most valuable part is establishing baselines. So, when you see fluctuations, you can give context for why they matter. I think that it gets very much, Tori, to the crux of what you're saying. So,
Yeah, I think the baseline, like baseline metrics of like what
mhm,
is it now, and then measuring it over time, but also maybe some problem value metrics, like
mm,
especially if you have members of your organization who might need convincing that we do need to improve this customer experience. If you can define the value of that problem, the cost essentially of not solving this problem, that can be a really powerful tool. Like, in public service a lot, there's often like problem value metrics around like cost of service. So you
mhm,
can say like, okay, we have, let's say we have a really outdated website and people are calling, like 10,000 people are calling a day with questions that they should be able to find the answer to online, ideally.
yeah,
Well, we could calculate what that costs, right? Like how much on average does it cost to employ the call center folks? How much does, how many hours are they working on it? Like how much do we think that could be reduced based on industry standards, if we had an easy to navigate and understand, plain language, accessible,
mhm,
site? And you could say like, you know, if we are able to fix this, we could reduce a lot of costs for our organization and focus that, funding on providing the new services the legislature keeps on passing, or
yeah.
improving the actual service versus answering questions that could be answered elsewhere.
Definitely. All right, we only have 2 minutes left,
Oh, wow.
so I wanna give Tori a chance to give us some final thoughts here. But first, I just wanna say to that point that you just made, I think too, it just shows that CX is part of everyone's job. It's not just sort of the corner of, the department that has CX in their title, but really just how embedded CX is into the organization overall. Before I let Tori give her final thoughts, I do just want to tell everyone that our next chat is going to be on Monday. That's supposed to say February 12th, not February 1W. So just some improvement for future CXs, COPs, but it's going to be at 4 p.m. and we're going to be talking about online forms, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'm very interested to hear what you all have to say about that. In addition, you can always check out our newsletter that's going to be coming to your inboxes monthly with helpful resources. We've also got the LinkedIn group, so feel free to pop over there if you haven't already. And as always, you can always email me at emily@govloop.com. So, Tori, you have already shared some fantastic notes with us today. If you want the audience to walk away thinking about one thing, what should their takeaway for today be?
I would just really encourage you to think about how can you create metrics that help you measure the change you want to make in your customers' lives. That I think if you can change that point of view, you can end up with some really powerful, really helpful metrics that are also really motivating for the people that have control over making changes that can impact those metrics. I will also give like one little tiny plug for Jared's school. He has some great content around user experience outcome based metrics and more about like problem value metrics or success metric or project metric focused on that. And I really love that framework right now for coming up with
Mhm.
metrics that are meaningful. I'll also throw my email into the chat. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to continue the conversation. I feel like we just got started.
I know. 30 minutes goes by so very quickly. And that is very kind of you to share your information. Tam, in the follow-up email today, we will of course be sending you a link to the LinkedIn group. So don't you worry, you'll be able to see that in there. And Tori, thank you so much for being so kind to share your contact information with everybody. I'm sure you're going to get lots of requests because you shared a whole lot of great information. As always, we really appreciate everybody joining today's session. I learned a lot from you, obviously, Tori, but from our audience as well and from our attendees. So thank you so much, everyone who shared your thoughts, questions, and feedback in the chat. Keep that coming, and we'll see you all next month. Bye.